Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm excited. We're into the race season now. We're both clients and I guess myself, and you're going to a few races here and there as well. So we're into the competitive race season.
Yes, I feel like I have a race coming up in like under 2 weeks now, and I'm actually still not sure what I'm doing in the race. It's a relay, 100-mile relay with a few people, but it's unclear how many of the people are showing up. Mm-hmm. So at this point, I could run anywhere from, I think it's like 40K to 100K. So we'll see how that goes. But okay. I'm excited for that.
Well, our question that we're dealing with a little later on in the episode today, to give you a heads up of what's coming, is sort of, do you have to prepare by completing the full race distance, in a single workout? So it depends on the race, but we'll delve into that today, looking at something like a 100-miler. Would you run 100 miles in the training or in biking? Certainly maybe that's more common and reasonable sometimes. Would you do that? But biking events also seem to be getting longer and longer. So that question is always, do you need to replicate? So that's what we're going to deal with. We have a great listener question today.
I really like the idea of having on our YouTube channel, where you can also watch these episodes live if you want to see what we look like, just having like hashtag it depends coming up every time someone says it depends on this show, which, as you've heard me say a billion times as well, every time someone says it depends, I know they're trustworthy, because frankly, if the answer isn't it depends and you have a blanket statement for anything, you're probably wrong.
Well, and I think that's a nice reason to have the more specific question that a listener is asking, because then we can focus on that and, put the caveat that, if your goal is slightly different, but at least we're, talking about a specific question.
And I think part of it also is the mentality of the person themselves when it comes to this topic. So again, we'll get into that a little bit later. But I mean, how's racing and training going? You actually had a really good race weekend the other weekend, and we haven't talked about that yet.
I started with a double. I did a gravel race on Saturday and mountain bike cross country, Olympic on Sunday.
Okay, so let's ask the question of why do the double, and is this something that you would recommend to...
Well, we just had an episode that was out about sort of preparing for two different races, and that one, the specific question was more even spacing them out, or maybe you have, a gravel race one weekend, a mountain bike race one weekend, something like that. And that one we sort of settled on the specific question we were answering. The races were pretty similar, but we talked about how the personal characteristics and the goals you had at those events were the big determinant. So if you're very familiar with a gravel race and a mountain bike race, and the one gravel race isn't, unbound, where it's 200 miles, and then the mountain bike race is an hour and 15 minutes or something, those are very different. So in my case, I've been doing this for some time, and so some of this is, sort of just a challenge, right? I can do one or the other, and they were sort of just close together. It worked with sort of staying with friends, so I figured why not get in there, and there was the first race weekend of the year, and tear off the Band-Aid and see how we went. So I got on to, I don't know what I did. I guess I was fourth on the first one, which was good. I was in with the lead pack, a bunch of young guys, and then I got dropped in the last little bit, but I played it pretty tactically well. Usually I'm very dumb at racing tactically, so I sort of played the cards I had well. And then same thing Sunday, I couldn't quite go with the start with the young. They started us with the juniors as well, so the start was pretty hard, but got in there and rode myself back up into third late in the race. So I got on that podium, and I even got a little bit of money, which is nice on day two.
Yes, it meant we were only negative 500 or so in the whole
yeah,
weekend.
Well, racing never makes sense. So that was great. Yeah, it was really good, and I think confidence boosting. We're going into the first Canada Cup this weekend, so I will race Masters in that category because it's a national level series. So to not have, to have that weekend of the two races, big load, lots of racing experience, 2 start lines, lots of pack racing, good leg speed on both of those. So then good confidence boost coming into this. Now that is a Masters race versus I did an elite race, a provincial elite race for the second race. So for me, that was sort of a challenge. B, why not go and see lots of people and, connect with lots of people. And then sort of a confidence fitness boost, hopefully, into this Canada Cup that came 2 weeks after that, right? So that was the idea. We'll see how it all plays out this coming weekend.
Nice. Yeah, I have not raced yet this year, but well, I guess actually I technically did that Elevate Challenge at Blue Mountain, but that was more of a training run than a race day for sure for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Good
think
experience
good
though.
experience,
Start lines and lots of mud.
Yeah. Actually, what I really enjoyed this weekend when you were racing, you had the gravel race in a different location than where I needed to be to do my talk with the girls at the O Cup. So I actually ran the 11 miles mostly on trail. Shout out to Eric for making me that awesome route. So mostly on trail, I ran the 11 miles to the race, but the weather was so good, I actually ended up running back as well. So I had a really good long run weekend. And honestly, this past weekend, so this was 2 weeks ago, this past weekend I had a 20-miler. And I gotta tell you, doing the back-to-back 11-mile runs with 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours in between, felt so different than the 20-miler, which I think is something we might kind of get into here as we're talking about the full race distance.
Right.
But I really enjoy, like I had never done that before, really. Kind of taking that extended break between two medium runs, I guess.
And you've been playing with doubles a little bit more, so it is sort of that mindset of the double workout a little bit. Yeah,
which I have found really funny. I've been trying to do a couple night runs just to get ready for running in the dark and getting used to my headlamp again, and just doing little 10K runs at night after having done 10-mile whatever during the day. Suddenly you're like, I ran 16 miles today, and it doesn't feel like it. So, yeah, really, doubles are sort of shocking as far as how effective they are.
Yeah, it can be a great way to do it, and certainly, we encourage people to do, something like a strength workout and a intensity workout, and it's hard sometimes to get over that, and you are a little tired mentally and physically going into the double, but it is nice. It does solve some of these problems of trying to increase your frequency or your density of training, the volume of training. And then also I do like it for things like where you have the two intensity workouts on the same day. So it would be something like strength training and an interval workout is on a Tuesday, and then that day is a high intensity day, and then everything else can sort of be low intensity. It does sort of solve that, which is, I don't know if anyone's seen that, the Norwegian double threshold days that have been popular over the last year or so. And that's sort of the idea there is you're loading up this day, Tuesday, say, and then the other days can be low intensity, right? But you're really adding more stress to that day.
Yeah, I definitely find the doubles tricky, though. I'm going to say particularly, and this obviously will apply for men and women, but I think as a woman, it is a pain in the ass to do the doubles sometimes, because it's when do you shower? Like, when do you dry your hair? When do you get dressed, put on makeup? And I mean, obviously when you work in an actual office or something, this is even more difficult, but even just working from home, this is annoying, because it's either I shower twice during the day or I spend half the day kind of grimy. So I do think this is, like, doubles sound great and are, great from a physiological perspective, but can be a giant pain in the butt from like a cultural, societal
and I
perspective.
would say, again, from a master's, we had our episode with Stephen Chung where we're talking about heat adaptation things, and there's a lot of these sexy, cherry on the top type last 1% things that you'll hear, and they're the sexy things to talk about. But I would say most masters do not do this. They don't have the time to do doubles, right? They're maybe do something like, as we do, an easy yoga core strength in the morning, and then maybe they do a bike workout at lunch or after work. Or in the morning as their bike workout or something, right? But it's very rare. Most people do not have, and I don't know if it's the showering that's the main barrier or not, but it is. It's all these things, right? And I always talk about it's, the fueling and the sitting on the couch recovering from the double threshold workout. Like, that stuff is elite, right? It's an elite level thing, and these people require that much load to make those additional benefits, but most of us are struggling to get in our hour a day of movement.
For sure. And I mean, I would say the few times I've done doubles now in the last couple of weeks, like, I think it has actually taken a fairly hefty physical toll that I didn't necessarily notice, because in the moment they didn't feel super hard. So like I said, the 2 11-mile runs didn't feel as hard as a 20-mile run, but the cumulative effect of them is still going to be the same. So yeah, shocker. I was really tired this past week. And I'm like, oh, right. I did back-to-back 11-mile runs, and I had done a night run a couple days prior to that. Plus all of my normal training. So of course I'm down a peg. I had done all of this extra stuff, but it didn't feel quite as intense as running, a 50K or 100K or whatever.
Sure. And I think we'll grab that idea because you are training to run 100 miles. So we'll grab that idea of doubles and 20 milers and put that into maybe a bit of context here. But do you want to do our ad break?
Yes, let's do a quick ad break. So we are, of course, talking about longtime sponsor, longtime favorite morning beverage, talking about AG1, the ultimate nutritional supplement.
I have something to tell you. This morning, I pulled out we have a large blender. What is that blender? The Vitamix. Great blender. We don't ever use it. I used to use it, but now it was in the back of the cabinet, but I crawled in there this morning. I got it out. And
it's sort of funny. I literally just did a post on Consummate Athlete that was like the 5 kitchen gadgets that we really love, and the one we never use
is the Vitamix.
Okay. And actually, a listener did actually email me and was like, "You should really use your Vitamix. They're fantastic." And I'm like, "I know they're fantastic."
Yeah, it's just in the back of the cupboard.
I moved it though, so it was like a little bit easier to access.
I got it out.
I thought.
Anyhow, strained my back. This is 40. So I put ginger, like fresh ginger, and a bit of honey, and then the athletic greens. I actually did that separate with the frother. Put it in the bowl, and then put the ginger juice, if you will, on top. Lovely. Fantastic.
Yes, and it was super great to have the Vitamix going at 6:15 in the morning.
You and the neighbors love the engine of the airplane taking off, grinding rocks.
Yeah, really, really great. Fantastic.
So this was an ad for Vitamix, apparently,
Yeah.
but or not. But we're really like this athletic green. So it's something that you can add to a morning smoothie, or you can just simply froth it up, mix it up with a spoon, or in your bike water bottle if you're on the go. It really mixes quite nicely. Tastes great. If you ever had other greens powders, it probably didn't. This one is quite tolerable.
I love it, honestly.
Some say it's more than tolerable.
I think it's delicious.
Okay.
And it has all of your stuff, your vitamins, your minerals, your adaptogens, your greens, basically probiotics, prebiotics, all the good stuff, none of the bad stuff. It is NSF certified for sport, so it's actually been third-party tested to make sure that it contains what it says it does and nothing extra, which is, as you know, very important to us when we're talking about any supplements.
Yeah, no one needs a doping violation.
Exactly. And I'm very excited. I have a trip coming up. I don't actually I haven't flown that much. I was actually just realizing I haven't flown in a year.
So I bet you're going to take some of these travel packs.
I'm going to take the travel packs.
You're going to wear some skinny jeans and put them in that back pocket?
I am not going to wear skinny. What kind of monster wears skinny jeans on a plane?
Hey, I mean, probably some people do. Some people wear leather pants sometimes too, so kudos.
Yeah, kudos to them, I guess. But
leather pants, I don't think they have pockets. So.
I will be in my big cargo pants here. But anyway, if you want to get the 5 free travel packs plus a year,
and you can put them in whatever type of pocket you have.
Any type of pocket.
We're not judging.
No.
Now you probably shouldn't keep it in your pocket very long because that's probably not great from a temperature standpoint. But you could put it in your back pocket of your skinny jeans.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how that's going to go at TSA, when you have to go through the machine. Sir, we're going to need to pat you. What is this in your back pocket?
What are all these vitamins and minerals you're hiding in your back pocket?
This is 75 key nutritional. Anyway, to get your 5 free travel packs and your year of immune supporting of vitamin D, plus, of course, your actual subscription to AG1, which comes in these lovely packets delivered straight to your door, super convenient. You can pause your subscription at any time, which is fantastic. Head to drinkag1.com/MollyH to get your 5 free travel packs. Again, drinkag1.com/MollyH. And let us know what you think it tastes like, because this is still a hot debate for us.
I think it tastes like green powder, but away you go.
I think it tastes like papaya, having never tasted papaya in my entire life.
Well, we'll get you one of those someday. So we're talking about this question of, do I need to do the race distance? And probably we could put bracket, race time, duration, in training, to prepare. I'm preparing for a task. Often we'll talk about, being specific, replicating the demands. I was telling you, I just sent an email to a client talking about, a lot of times we cramp on that last hill, that last lap of the race. And then if we look at training, often training hasn't been close on, the amount of ascent, the climbing, time, the distance, the time in zone. Some of this stuff is just so far off, right? You've been riding on flat pavement. You're now doing a very hilly mountain bike or gravel race. And for sure, in hour 3, you've depleted yourself and your muscles don't contract anymore. So you have trouble. You bonk, you blow up, you cramp, you get really sad, whatever, you run out of energy. So this is sort of the back and forth that you'll see where you do need to prepare for the race, but does that always mean that you need to run 100 miles in a single run before you do a 100-mile race? Or, do you have to ride 200 miles before you do an unbound gravel race? So it's tough. And I think this question often gets asked more for those ultra races.
Yeah.
Also for your marathon type stuff running, I think this is relevant, right? Do you run a full marathon in your running training before you go and do your Boston Marathon?
Right. And so this is where actually the mindset part that I alluded to earlier comes in, from like specifically marathon training. This is actually a really common marathon training question. And it really does depend on the person, because for some people doing 26 miles, whether it's, you know, in a day, they do like a couple runs, or they even, you know, they run 20 and walk 6, or like walk 6, run, whatever. For some people, that's actually like just this mental boost that they really need in order to be comfortable on the start line.
Yep.
But for other people, running the whole thing actually would be detrimental to their race, because now they've actually like ticked the box of like, I did 26 miles.
Sure.
I'm good. And it suddenly kind of takes the intensity of like the race day out, and you actually don't have the same like oomph during the race to hit that 26.2 miles.
Yep.
Because you've already done it. It's not as sexy
That's
anymore.
interesting. I hadn't really thought, you know, but maybe that is true. And then you'd maybe say, okay, well, at home I ran 26.2 miles, and I did it in 3 hours and 30 minutes in training. But then on race day, you know, it's hot. Maybe it's a little hillier, or there's some variable. The day is just a different day. And maybe you're not on track for even 3:30. Maybe you're going to run a 3:32, you know, and then do you quit? You know, because you can see your pace on your fancy watch, and you're gonna miss it, right? You're not, and maybe you thought you could knock half an hour, you're gonna run sub 3, but you're like, I'm barely gonna beat my training. So I could see that mental thing being a factor. I hadn't even really thought towards that. In any case, do we want to read the specific question?
I'm not actually sure where the specific question is in our note.
Oh, okay. Maybe we have to.
I couldn't really find it.
Okay. We didn't prepare.
Okay. So the question in general is that this race coming up is going to have a ton of elevation and a ton of distance. So should they do it? So this is more like talking towards an unbound, like a 200-mile race, or say like a 100K running race. Something that's not typical in a day, and where you'd pretty much need to have aid stations or someone supporting you along the way. It's going to be really hard for you to do this effort by yourself.
Yeah. And I would say there's probably, so I do a lot of, you know, say cyclocross to cross country Olympic. So obviously that stuff, like that's a 90-minute ride. The distance is somewhere between, you know, 15 and I don't know what would be the longest, maybe like a 40 or 50K if it was really fast, maybe. So of course we're going to ride longer than that in both time and distance. This would be same for 5K runners, 10K runners. So I think there's probably something around that typical marathon time where it's, you know, 2 to 3 hours, where we start getting, you know, whether this is running or biking. I think this is a bit of me guessing at this a little bit, but you know, around that 2-3 hours, there's probably a little bit of a question for a lot of people whether we need to do the distance or duration, however we're measuring this thing. Not everything is measured in distance, right? Cross-country mountain biking is usually measured more in time. We'd maybe look more at the climbing as well, how much ascent there is, which I think is important. A lot of times people don't pay attention to the climbing, and I would say that's probably a more important thing to pay attention to versus distance. But what we want to look at is around that 3 hours time, we're probably starting to think, you know, more about getting the training in consistently across the week, because if you do something, if you run a full marathon, most of us aren't going to be walking very well for the next week or so, right?
For sure. So yeah, I mean, you're not just, okay, great, you did the distance, but now you've basically done the race, and you need to recover almost as though you've done the race.
And I would say this gets into, I get nervous after 3 hours with biking, which seems low probably to a lot of people, you know, at least in their brain. If not, you know, if you actually look at your past weeks, probably it is a bigger ride for you versus your normal load, right? 3 hours is a fair bit, you know, sure, I'm sure you can do 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 hour rides. But the reality is most people struggle to get consistent 3 hour rides in, like once or twice a week, which would be just a huge deal for most people for their fitness. The nice thing about that is I think the risk reward, we had an episode Joe Friel was on, and him and I talked a bit about some of the concepts he has around risk reward, sort of this idea that, you know, there's, if you train for an hour, there's great benefit, you know, you go from an unhealthy, like inactive, and then the 1 hour of exercise would be great. And then if you go to 2 hours, that's better, 3 hours, that's better, 5 hours, that's better. 8 hours. Okay, I'm speaking more like to the week, right? And then at some point, it's like you've trained too much and you're getting tired. You have saddle sores. You get IT band tendonitis. You, in the running case, you're so sore you can't even run the next day. So you start getting worse by training more, right? And that's that inverted U, that rainbow shape. I really like to sort of, as a mental model, to think through concepts. At some point, there's this decreasing return. You get worse for doing more. And that makes logical sense, but you'd be surprised the number of us that are like, no, I need to ride 7 hours, even though I'm going to end up with IT band tendonitis and not train effectively for the next month into my race. I'm going to ride 7 hours to prepare for Unbound rather than do, say, 3 to 5 hour rides, long rides on the weekend, and maybe do 2 of those, Saturday and Sunday. Because that's the other thing, is I'm not opposed to, you talked about dark doubles, so maybe do a night ride on Friday night and then Saturday morning up early, do 3 to 5 hours, recover over the course of Saturday, up Sunday, another 3 to 5. I'm okay with that, but that's 3 rides instead of one jumbo 10-hour. You proved that you can ride 200 miles in a day before you went out and rode 200 miles in a day at Unbound. So that's, I think, the fundamental thing is this idea of quality and frequency, and then the recovery capacity off the event. And that's obviously going to be different for running versus biking. But I think that's, if you're answering this question, it's sort of like, if you do that, run, bike, whatever, what is the consequence in the days and weeks and months afterwards as far as your preparation?
Yeah, I mean, I can say if I look at my training schedule, if I'll have this day in a couple weeks where I could, depending on how the situation goes, I might be doing 100K. And I'll tell you, if I do the 100K, I'm not going to be training the next week. Like, that's going to be pretty much off, maybe a couple easy runs. It's going to actually be a trade-off in my training. I think that's like the funny thing that we don't always like realize or think about, is doing these big efforts, these really long days, often tend to lead to less training overall. Like I always say, the month I did my 100-miler is the lowest volume month I have done in years. Right.
You mean you didn't like get really fit after the race and just start running 200-mile weeks or something?
Yeah.
Interesting. So I think that's the central idea. Now, is there rules of thumbs there? I think, we used to talk about your long ride for mountain biking, again, short mountain biking, not 100-mile mountain biking, was maybe like 1.5 times longer, right? So something like that, right? Where we'd maybe say, okay, the mountain bike race used to be 2 hours, so maybe you're riding like a 3 hour is a good target for your long ride. So sometimes that's like a metric I see. I see in a book like this book, this is The Uphill Athlete. This is great. Steve House, Scott Johnson, Killian Jornet, some big names there.
I like that DW has joined the chat if you're watching on YouTube, and he just looked up and licked the book.
It's a great book.
He's just in a mood right now.
So they have some great training programs for skimo and uphill athletes, as per the title. So trail runners, mountain runners, doing 100-mile, 100K, 50K. And I'm trying to find this, here they go. So they have these, I'll put this on the screen here. There's nice bar graphs of these little weeks. And so what you see here is they're building their week. And when I look here at sort of a 50K running race for a Cat 1, so a really high level person, these are the per week kilometers that they're running. So they're going to do a 50K race, and their weekly peak week in this plan is 80K, 50 miles, 80K. Okay, and they're training to run 50K in a single day. So in this way, there's almost like a rule of thumb to me. And a lot of these are similar. Let me do one more here. So this is a Cat 2, so not quite as fast. And they're preparing over the course of a long season to get ready for a 100K run. And their peak week in this is 126. So just slightly over the race volume. So that might be something we can look at is, could we do about the race volume in maybe time, but this is distance for running, or a bit more in our biggest week. So not every week, because sometimes this gets put into like, I have to do 100 miles every single week because I heard someone say that on, a podcast, and that's not what they meant. They probably meant that this person like often, across the season maybe does 100-mile weeks like 4 times, but then it gets translated into every week, and that's not what they mean.
I also just want to be extremely clear that I think after the 100K, that actually changes when you're talking about running. Like I very rarely do 100-mile weeks, let alone 130-mile weeks.
And again, you have to consider who you're talking about. So some of your best in the world, I think, are often going to be up and around there. Not every week of the year, but they're going to hit 100-mile weeks. I think that's probably true at the like peakest level.
Very peak, and where they're doing it as their full-time job.
Here in this plan, progression for a 100-mile running race, we see 1 week at 161 kilometers. So this is for a high-level person. Again, these are just models. This doesn't mean you need to. And I think it's important to look at different things. So this is age, probably decreases this. You would train less as you get older. Just because your recovery capacity is lower. And then the other thing we're going to say is the speed, right? We did a minimalist Ironman training program, I think by Matt Fitzgerald. It was a great plan, but it was sort of interesting because it was minimal, assuming you could move pretty quickly, because a lot of the things are by distance. So, a 10K run is fast if you can roll 10Ks at, 4.5 minute Ks or something, right? You're done in, there's a 45-minute workout. But there are people who do Ironman where their easy pace for a 10K run could be, I don't know what it would be, like a 6, that could be like an hour 10. By the time you warm up, it could be an hour and a half workout. So then the volume for the week actually starts getting quite excessive, just, if you're going by distance in this way, right? Which is what these a lot of run plans are based on distance, right?
Well, it depends, actually. Like, I think a lot of newer training plans in general, I think for newer athletes should be more time-based than distance-based. And then that's actually what worked with my coach, David Roche, and I. Like, when I first started, we really did just do time.
Okay.
For the first, I think, year, just as
smart.
he was, seeing what my sort of averages were. And then I think based on that a little bit, it changed to, okay, here's the distance now. Mm-hmm. So now I train on distance, but that's not how I started.
Right.
And I think that's probably a really good rule of thumb, especially when we're talking about getting ready for these massive races. Because, a 200-mile Unbound can take someone...
I always forget the actual things, but your span is probably the fastest. We know the fastest are like around 10, I think, right?
Yeah.
And then they go up. I don't even know what the limit is. I should know, but I'm
not really sure what the cutoff is.
I have like 4 different races in my head at the moment. So let's say it's like in around 20 hours, something like that.
I was going to say easily it could take someone 20 hours.
Yeah. So, and I know 14, I think that's the Beat the Sun is, I think around 14. Does that make sense? Sort of like 6 a.m. start to like 8 p.m. or something, which is a lot of people's goal, right? But that's still not probably, I don't even know if that's the majority of the people in the race would be ahead of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a big day on the bike. So what we're relying on, especially in cycling, so running, there's this impact issue, right? So you're going to see runners do less total time, a lot of, mostly, than your elite level cyclists, and probably even some of the elite master cyclists or the people who are training for these ultra things. But I think the central issue is, when you're preparing for these 200-mile or even 100-mile events on off-road, a lot of what we talk about is towards off-road, right? This could be different you did an article about getting ready for a Grand Fondo Century or something. That's a little different. Again, road is pretty fast, but I would say, again, the most people that I train towards those Fondos probably aren't riding their race duration. Certainly, what we might do sometimes, I'll do this with Leadville sometimes, is try and spend 6-7 hours on your bike, just to get used to the saddle, but the terrain might not be specific. But then they might do 4 hours where it's very specific, very hilly gravel. So you're not covering the same distance. You might be covering a lot of elevation, but you're training for 4 hours that's quite vigorous, maybe over race pace, right? So you get this like harder day, more specific day, and then maybe you get more of an endurance-oriented day. And that endurance-oriented day to me is building that endurance system that we know persists for a long time. Around that aerobic threshold that, everyone's talking zone 2, that line is almost flat out. When we go past like an hour and a half, and then it goes 3 hours. And then if you look at your power curve, everyone knows where their 20-minute and their curve, right? Their sprint is over here on the left. And then it goes out to like 3 hours, 9 hours, 12 hours. That line is very flat, right? Until we die, right? Like the line, the wattage output keeps going. It doesn't have a lot of fade. And that's why people can do things like race across America, right? They just keep moving at that, zone 1 pace or whatever you want to call it, right? They can persist because it's run on fat. The body can keep pushing that until there's a mechanical issue, a gut issue, a motivational issue. You fall asleep and, roll into the ditch and you have to go to sleep, right? So that is what we're relying on in a lot of these big events, is that pace for 90 minutes, 3 hours, will persist. It will keep going. So as your zone 2 improves, you'll be able to hold that, especially on a bicycle, again, because there isn't the mechanical loading issue. But even at a 100-miler, a lot of the people are walking.
Right, yeah.
So again, so long as the mechanical system holds up, their body, their muscles, their joints, their ligaments, as long as that and the gut and the mental stay together, their energy system will keep going. So that's why we don't necessarily need to do a 100K run or a 200-mile bicycle ride to prepare for the 200-mile bicycle ride. We'd rather get that nice week of training and month of training to prepare, right? To get that load across the week so that we don't risk injury, illness, and we keep the quality higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, glancing at this book, you very clearly see at no point is someone really doing the full distance like in any of these weeks.
Well, it can't be. Yeah, because
they can't be. It wouldn't make sense with the mileage.
Right. Well, I mean, unless they trained once, right? Yeah. I guess you always talk about that training program where
I like my training program idea.
Train for 12 hours one day, and then you take the rest of the week off.
It's great.
It's the ultimate weekend warrior plan.
We should really trademark that and get it up on Training Peaks.
So I'm trying to think. So the other thing, sometimes I'll do with cycling, so you do something like Leadville, say there's 3,000 meters of climbing, 9,000 feet, something like that. So that to me is something where we want to look at, across the week, are you getting close to that? Some people, that's not a big deal, and they often do that. But that, again, when we're talking about people cramping, it's just like, have you done a ride with 1,000 meters if the race is going to have 3,000 meters? Or something around 50% even might be a good rule of thumb if we were looking for things, okay, you're going to do a 200-mile ride. Probably we'd knock at least 100-mile off. I like that. I like that 50% distance. Some clients will push, and I always put this in plans, like if you feel like you need to do 200K before the 200 miles, okay. That I almost treat that like an event, like a C or B priority event. So in lieu of doing a race, you can go and do this big jumbo ride, which hopefully is fun and something you want to do. But I get it. Some people just need that mental experience.
Well, and that's what my friends and I did before my 100-miler. Now, bear in mind, this is 4 months before, to be clear. Mm-hmm. We did 100K. That was just like a fun run kind of situation.
So sometimes there's that metric imperial sort of rule, we could call that. Or you could do like a 50%. So, you're doing 100 miles. Let's at least get you through a 50-miler, which often will be an event.
Yeah.
To your point that we may as well gameplay the fact that people are around. So there's a social comparison. There's a start line. There's a specific time you have to be there. So we have to, make that early morning start that sucks. And what are you having cereal before this? Are you eating anything before you start? So answering a bunch of these questions, because that is what we're training. It's not just, I need to get my mileage and everything will be okay when I run 50 miles. It's like, no, well, if you didn't think about what you're going to eat before, during, if you didn't think, are you using poles? Does your pack rub on your back? Are you changing your shoes? All these things. That's where we, and then you get nervous because other people are looking at you when you run, right? You're used to doing 100-mile runs in the forest, and then all of a sudden people look at you and you just cave in, which isn't picking on you, but this is the nature of like, you're going to go do this massive event where like there's cameras and everything else. So we want to prepare for that. So to your point, so that there's aid stations and these things, some of these longer challenges are probably better done as BC priorities a few months, 1 to 10 months, 12 months out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think like a local race for something like this would definitely beat, you're right, a solo day of training, because that's not going to give you the same stimulus.
And we've done, that was during the pandemic, but we did, that was fairly supported. We had like different houses or people in cars, and DW and I ran a bit with you, but then DW didn't, but then I came back and got him, and then we sort of supported the last 50K, right? So then you were getting aids more frequently. So you can set up, your do-it-yourself challenge, but that's asking a lot of, your family and stuff too, to set this stuff up as well, right? But that's the nature. Like the problem is this stuff takes, to do well, it takes it takes a bit of effort to execute it, because at some point then we're just slogging through, you're carrying so much weight with you or something like that. And that's an adventure. You might be a bike packer or a long trail hiker, but that's slightly different than when we're preparing. This question is specific about preparing for a Unbound or Leadville or any of these other, the Rift is a 200-mile one that a lot of people do in Iceland, something like that, right?
Love it. Anything else you can think of as far as getting ready for this? I guess actually maybe my last point here, or last point we can touch on is, how far out are we talking when we're talking about doing any of these gameplay situations? Because I think the problem is a lot of people asking this question are asking it, say, like 4 or 5 weeks or even less out from the race, because they suddenly recognize, like, oh crap, I'm going to need to ride 350 miles, 200 miles, whatever the distance is, in a month. I should probably do that right now, because. And I understand this.
In Unbound, we talk about in Ontario at least, but northern sort of states and provinces, it's hard to do much, outdoors long, until we get into May. But the race is June 1st usually, or end of May for Unbound. So it's tough. You sort of only have those last 4 or 5 weeks if you're lucky. Maybe you got, probably it's a good plan to go in March someplace you can get some volume in.
We do have that post I post most September's, October's, where it's like, you only have 5 weeks of training left before Unbound.
Sure. So we talk about, in this fall for Unbound, for especially people in the northern hemispheres, but I think around the world really. But, if you can go south, it's not as much. You could train, some of these bigger things in February, January, in the early winter. But yeah, use those months, because that's, as you say, that's 6-7 months out where you might do some hot gravel, maybe some event, something like a Big Sugar could be well placed, right? Like a Big Sugar in October. I'm trying to think of other events in November. There's a few, like Iron Cross maybe is in the fall. Is it in the fall? Yeah, Iron Cross is in the fall. Some of these things that, might look towards a longer gravel race, that you can get some of that experience out before you go into the winter, right? And then you've sort of, you've got that, you've figured it out a little bit, and then you can train, on the trainer or cross train for a bunch of months in the middle there. And that's a great solution.
All right. Well, I think we can wrap up there, but I will also say, if you are kind of struggling with this, you could definitely book a call with our coach, Peter Glassford here. You can find that over at consummateathlete.com to actually look at your training, look at the race, and actually talk through, like, what is the best
if I can
scenario.
I know we always say, like, we're wrapping up, and then one more thing. When I look at this book, and this is the same as a Joe Friel, training progression, is it doesn't really matter what I say you need to do beforehand, but the important thing is where you are now too, right? We don't want to overload your system. And really, if wherever you are, if you're at 5-hour weeks right now and you've only done a 90-minute ride, you're going to get huge benefit by just stepping up a tiny bit. So again, I'll put this on the screen here. So you can see we have bar graphs that are increasing from left to right, over time, and they're sort of in 3-4 week blocks. And the way that training is, right? So you did a 5-hour week, a 6-hour week, a 7-hour week, you take a rest week. You did a 7-hour week, you did an 8-hour week, you did a 10-hour week, you take a rest week. And the rest weeks are just, maybe 50% load, 60% load, something like that. And I think that's a great way. Even if you're getting close to the event, you're going to get huge benefit by just stepping that up. And your training over the last 4 years has been very much like that, right? You started whatever the weeks were, and you were doing 5K runs all the time, and then your normal run has grown. Now it's like rarely lower than a 10K run, and then you keep stepping up and keep stepping up. And what a reasonable long run is, now you do 20 milers more often, but that didn't happen in year one. So I think keeping that in mind, it's not just this one big thing you're getting ready for. Certainly you want to do some specific training, but you can also keep that base of training specific to you and just building over time, like what is normal and sustainable, and that's going to give a stimulus to your body. Just a little bit more will always give that, like, stimulus to make you better, even though it's not exactly, it's not a 200K race, it's just a 100-minute ride instead of a 90-minute ride. That's going to be a load that makes you stronger, right? And it's sustainable. It's not like a fire hose that's just like drowning out all the adaptations.
Yeah. But like we said in the beginning of this episode, and I think I alluded to in the last episode, you do need to be really careful as you're, like, even gradually. I think actually the gradual ones are the most dangerous. When you are stepping it up and you are increasing your volume, that does mean you need to increase your fueling. It means you need to increase your recovery time sometimes. Like, that means, like, you need more sleep. Sorry.
Which is great. And I think that's, overwhelming, because it's this big complex thing. It's not as simple as just saying TSS or distance or hours or vert in the week. You don't just keep going, like, up and up and up, and everything will be okay as long as the distance gets to 200 miles in a day. It's just this thing. I'm going to fit it in before breakfast. there's all these ways you can get better and more solid on your, again, nutrition is a huge one. Just sleeping, it's so cliche, but it's like such a great way to let your body adapt and just be resilient and arrive on the start line not sick and not injured, and like aware of your surroundings. So there's lots of ways you can go about this, but you want to be sure that, like you say, you're stepping up the demands, and that's how the body adapts. Is it just accepts that, okay, well, I guess 10Ks are the normal after I've been adapting to this over months and years. And that's really the great thing, the cool thing about training is like what's normal can keep growing over time.
Yeah,
but you want to start at where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we will wrap up here. If you have any questions for us, definitely head over to consummateathlete.com. We have contact forms on there, or shoot us a DM on Instagram at Consummate Athlete. You can find us on Facebook, on YouTube, all of the places. And if you like this podcast, do us a huge favor. Just hit subscribe, rate, review. It's super, super helpful. We super appreciate it. And as always, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.